So, want to transition at this point now. I want to take a look briefly at what is known as the Dominion Theology, and the premise of it, and where it comes from. What's behind it? Where did it get its beginnings? And we'll just take a look at kind of the modern jump that kind of went into it. And one person in particular that has his fingers in all of this. He's kind of the modern day mover and the driver of it, though he's been gone since 2016. His name is C. Peter Wagner. So when you hear Dominion Theology, I want to look at this part of it. There's Dominion Theology. When you hear theology, it's just for the sake of what we're going to do. How does God do what he does? And so it's the study of God by his nature. What does he do in his interaction? It's our trying to figure out how God does what he does. So their theology, the people that are into Dominion, their theology, we're going to use his own words. But the theology really kind of works like this. God is going to do a work in these end times. According to them, the church is going to have a major role in this, of doing all the heavy lifting, and then Jesus is going to return. So in their eschatology, their study of the last times, based on what they believe God is doing, they start to teach in the sense of the end times, their prominent role in those end times. And we'll see how he kind of parses through all that stuff. So if you say there are two major things, theology, God is going to, in the last days, use the church, and they're going to have a major role in bringing about the second coming of Jesus Christ, then that means that they are going to look in the eschatology sense, because this is what God's going to do. Here's how we're going to operate in these days. And that's where it goes forward. So that's when you have things like the Seven Mountains Mandate, which we will get to in another Q&A. And they're going to do that seven mountains because God's going to raise up a whole brand new group of prophets and apostles, the new Apostolic Reformation. Those are going to be, if you will, the soldiers that are going to conquer these seven mountains of culture. So this is why it's important that we don't just throw out these terms one after another. Christian nationalism, dominionism, seven mountains, and the new Apostolic Reformation. They're all intertwined, but if we just throw them out there as though they're all the same thing, you have to basically say, first of all, dominion is the theology behind it. The seven mountains is their marching orders, and the new apostles and the new prophets are the soldiers and the people under them that are going to implement all of that stuff. Because part of all of that stuff is that they want to see the United States, one small portion of their whole agenda is that the nation itself is going to be turned back to Jesus. That's the view. So we handled a bit of that last week in the Christian nationalism. Today I want to deal with dominionism. So dominion, what's dominion? Dominion simply means it's the controller, it's the power. So here's their premise. When God created everything as it was, he had Adam and Eve, and Adam had dominion. He had rule over these things. God told him, you're going to have dominion, and it's for you to do the things. God's given you this creation, and you and Eve are to be fruitful and multiply. You're going to, take care of God's perfect creation. What happens but sin enters in? So following dominion theology, when sin comes in, dominion is lost. It's handed over to Satan because of man's sin. Dominion is taken away from Adam, and it's now given, Satan has that dominion. Now, in these days, because there are these new apostles and these new prophets, God's doing some brand new work in these end times. That's the theology. He's going to now use the church, and they are going to arrest and take back the dominion that was lost to Satan by this brand new work of the Holy Spirit in these last days through these apostles and prophets. And we're going to take back all of the creation and then deliver it back to the Lord, and he'll return to a world that's been repaired. That's their view, and we're going to see it in his own words. So it's from that we get dominion theology. That's what's meant by this. So the person that's really that you see his name all throughout all of this kind of stuff is a man named C. Peter Wagner. And C. Peter Wagner was with us until 2016 when he died. And he's the guy that really coined the term, the New Apostolic Reformation, and he did that back, I want to say, 1975. So it's not as though this is new. And so if we want to use that as the starting date, when he said this is what's going to take place, then we want to say, okay, so we should have a report card after 50 years. How well are they doing on all of this new work? These were when the new apostles and the new prophets were announced. The New Apostolic Reformation is 50 years old right now. So if we look back in 50 years, it's really kind of an easy thing for us to say, are they closer to their objectives than they were before? Is the world better now than it was 50 years ago? Is our country better now than it was 50 years ago, according to their agenda of arresting back power? So as we start to look at the Seven Mountains Mandate in the next Q&A, as we look at who these people are and what they're doing, are they taking ground back or are they losing ground? Now, anybody looking at this objectively has to say it has not been a good 50 years for these people if we're going to look at all of their statements and see how things are progressing. They're going in the opposite direction. Anybody looking at this ought to be able to see they're going in the opposite direction. I would have expected that, knowing what I know from the scriptures. I don't expect this to be a fix. So there's something I'm going to go ahead and read an excerpt. Let me bring it up on the screen right now because I want you to see in his own words. This is what he says will happen, and he wrote this back in 2007, 9 years before he passed. Okay, now this quote, it was from a much larger quote, but his point was he's contrasting the people like myself who believe that when the Lord returns for the church, what we call the rapture of the church, the world's in a pretty messed up condition. And it goes along with what I believe Jesus meant when he said, when the Son of Man returns, will he find faith on the earth? It's going to be in pretty desperate condition. In the part of this where I've taken this from, and again, you can go look at it. The name of the writing was Dominion, Kingdom Action Can Change the World. Go look that up. You can see the whole document. You can read it for yourself. But he gets into looking at people like me and thinking we're all wrong because we're looking at a world that's going to be in decay and decline, and the Lord will come back for the church because he's going to what he's going to do is judge the world. That's the book of Revelation. So he gives our side of it, in very brief terms, and said he used to believe that way, and but he doesn't believe that way any longer. So he gives the other option, that the world will be in a place of incredible decay at the time of the rapture. And that's what I personally believe, and I see that that's the signs all around us, because the people like the Dominionists have been telling us we're going to fix things, and yet it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. And we're looking at our watches and going, you've had 50 years, guys. And really it had been talked about even before that. When there are all the, quote, revivals and the weird spirituality of guys like William Branham back in the 40s and all the crazy stuff that they were doing way back then. C. Peter Wagner's 30 years to the future of those guys, and he's just doubling down on all of that nonsense and the healing and the revival and all that stuff. He's doing all the same things. So he's put forward in this writing that we have here, I've excerpted it here, he's given our side of it and said he used to believe that way. He says, but if, on the other hand, we now believe that God is mandating us to be involved in aggressive social transformation, it is obvious that we will arrive at a different viewpoint. We no longer accept the idea that society will get worse and worse because we now believe that God's mandate is to transform society so that it gets better and better. I agree with Jim Hodges, who suggests that we Christians need to get rid of our, quote, excessive desire to leave the planet. That's a backhanded shot at those of us who say, look, the day is going to come when the Lord is going to be done with this whole place. And man, I look around every single day and think, yeah, I'm ready for him to come back. It's just, I love my family and I love my life here and everything else, but you just see the horrible things that go on around us, and you think, I'm okay with the Lord starting that whole process where we'll see him face to face. I don't have a problem with that. But these people see us as like we're defeatists. So he says this. Now, this makes us much less dogmatic on theories of the millennium, what happens at the end. And see, even here, No, it's the rapture of the church. We're not waiting for the millennium. So he says, he's kind of conflating these different views and I think misrepresents a bit of our view. This makes us much less dogmatic on the theories of the millennium. I often say facetiously that I no longer know if I am premillennial or postmillennial or amillennial. I've decided that I am panmillennial, believing that everything is going to, quote, pan out all right in the end. And that sounds cute and everything else. That just means you've checked out. And you've bought into your own little theory, but there's no biblical reason. If you can't figure out if you're post or premillennial or amillennial, he's just trying to be too cute by half and say something that sounds so, man, I'm not going to concern myself with that stuff. If you don't concern yourself with that stuff, you'll buy into this lunacy. That's the thing that's so frustrating about it. So this gives you a real glimpse into, if you ask any of the people that are in this stuff here and now, that believe, and let me go ahead and bring this slide down and we'll conclude. If you look at the modern apostles and the prophets, the NAR, what they want to do in bringing back and controlling the 7 mountains of culture, when you look at that stuff, if you ask all of those people and you mention the name C. Peter Wagner, they're not going to roll their eyes and say that guy was nuts. He's the grandfather of it in the modern times. So they're going to speak favorably about him. But here you want to say, he wrote this in 2007. We're 18 years after this writing, 18 and a half years since he wrote this. And you would want to say, even from that time, tell me that we're working in the right direction according to his worldview. You can't make the case. So it's important for us to recognize when we put all of these pieces together, Christian nationalism is really their ultimate goal, reverting us back to the nation being governed by Christians. What's behind that? The theology is in the end times, God's going to raise up prophets and apostles and fix all the stuff that's broken. And he's going to do that in these supernatural ways. So in order to make that happen, he's going to raise up this whole group of prophets and apostles. We're going to get into all of that stuff in the later Q&As. So it's going to be this brand new work of the Holy Spirit through the church and through its leaders, these apostles and prophets. And their first targets are these 7 mountains in our culture. So education and finances and business, government, schools, all these different things. I'll give you all the 7 mountains and show you what they are. And we're going to use their own words. It's important that we don't try to tell people who they are with our own words. Let's let them speak for themselves, like with C. Peter Wagner. That gives you an idea of where we are in the theology behind it. And why it matters is because everybody's talking about this with the death of Charlie Kirk. Many people are trying to say he's one of those guys, as though you could say he had the exact same theology, the same eschatology, the same across the board, believed exactly as C. Peter Wagner says. But you look at the things that Charlie was saying, they may have been looking for the same kind of maybe end result, that we could do something that would change the culture in the nation. But do I think that Charlie would sit here and read, if he could, he'd read what C. Peter Wagner said and say, I completely agree with that, man. That's right where I'm at, and I'm pushing in the same direction. I don't believe that for a second. I've never seen anything that he said where he would say, there's not a bit of daylight between me and C. Peter Wagner. It's as though we're one person. We believe the same stuff. I don't believe that for a second. So anyway, was he useful to them? Yeah, because he was talking about politics and education, and he was getting out in the trenches and talking with them. The NAR people love Charlie Kirk. The Dominionists love Charlie Kirk. He's pushing in their direction. They don't need him to buy into their theology. He's just a vehicle to do the things that they think are being done. So I think we need to make sure that we don't just get so caught up in the titles that somehow we just put upon someone else something that's really not their intention. And there will be people that will disagree vehemently with me. Fine, let them disagree. I don't care. I'll put out the content that's here and let them draw their own conclusions. I'm not here to win an argument. I am not here to try to persuade anybody. But if you're not familiar with the terms, this will at least give you the operational knowledge so that they don't get all run together and you can't really tell the difference between all of it. We need to understand there's a theology and an eschatology behind it. There is the way that they think it's going to happen. And then there is the marching orders of how it's going to be brought to pass. All those things are independent, working for the same goal, but they're not all the same. So again, there's an agenda. There are the people who are going to be the drivers of it, but there's got to be an underlying philosophy behind it, or an eschatology and a theology. That's what I want to make sure that you have as we work through these different terms that you hear thrown around all the time. So we will pick up next week as we continue on through Isaiah, and in the Q&As we will continue to unwind a little bit of all of the stuff that's being discussed in light of Charlie Kirk and much of the church that's just making, I think some people are making just some insanely wild assumptions. And but again, they're going to say what they're going to say. Can't change that. I can't help it. Again, we'll pick up at verse 10 next week as we continue through the book of Isaiah. If you have any questions, contact me through the ministry's website. The email is found. You can do so through the website, and that is oldpaththeology.net.